Well, howdy, folks, and welcome back to Grunkle Tim Reads. I've been gone a spell, but sometimes you got to step back, let the weeds grow, and come back with a sharper hoe. Today's story ain't about tech giants or witches in the algorithm. It's about a valley, a people, and the cost of forgetting where your bread comes from. Now, don't go thinking this is a bedtime story. It's got roots deep in the ground, as deep as the ground we're standing on. So pour yourself a cup, and let me tell you about Everstead, the land of the builders, the PlentyFolk, and the lostlings. The three generations, Grunkle Tim, original. Long ago, in a quiet valley called Everstead, the seasons rolled as steady as a river. The first to settle here were known as the builders. They had seen fire, famine, and war. And when peace finally arrived, they worked as though tomorrow itself might vanish if they didn't nail it down today. They dug canals so the fields would never thirst. They planted orchards thick enough to shade the hills. They built barns, bridges, and towns, plain, sturdy, and made to last. And though their backs bent and their hands cracked, they took comfort in this, that their children would live better than they did. They sacrificed tremendously. This was their gift. Then came the children, known as the PlentyFolk. The PlentyFolk were born into abundance. Grain was cheap, houses plentiful, the barns of their parents already stood tall. They grew up climbing the old oaks, swinging the ropes tied to the rafters. They never wondered where their bread came from. It was always on the table. To them, Everstead's bounty felt natural, permanent, as if the valley had been waiting just for them. So when their time came to choose how to spend their strength, many turned not to orchards nor soil, but to promises. The Extractors arrived with fine clothes and finer words. "Put your grain with us," they said. "In your later years it will return tenfold. You will feast forever." The PlentyFolk trusted them. Why not? Life had always been full. And so piece by piece, the PlentyFolk savings, orchards, pensions, retirements all flowed into the hands of the Extractors. The Extractors were clever, and let's be honest, for a while, they did give the PlentyFolk a very nice return on their investment. But in the process, they strip mined the hills, they sold the lumber from the orchards, and built shining towers in lands far away. The fields looked the same, but the roots were weaker. The soil was thinner. Still, the PlentyFolk saw bread on their tables and thought, all is well. But for the moment, one brief moment, the Extractors almost lost their grip. When the great farming crash shook Everstead, the lostlings began to see through the game. They whispered that maybe it wasn't their fault that the barns were empty or the orchards were gone. Maybe, just maybe, the Extractors were the problem. That scared the Extractors. So they spun up a new trick. They whispered into the valley, "It's not us, it's each other." They told the young men, lostlings, that the young women were to blame. They told the women that it was the men. They told the light-skinned lostlings to watch the dark-skinned ones, and the dark-skinned ones to mistrust the light-skinned ones. And soon enough, the lostlings were at each other's throats, arguing over shadows, while the Extractors carried on strip mining what remained. This time, they weren't hoarding grain or silver. They were hoarding attention. While they were harvesting outrage, they had discovered that social capital could be mined just as ruthlessly as orchards and hills. And the lostlings, distracted, divided, and weary, never noticed the Extractors slipping back into the shadows. All seemed to have settled down. Things seemed okay on the surface. However, in the shadows, the Extractors kept their spell cast on the PlentyFolk. And when their children, the lostlings, came of age, they found the valley had really changed. The houses that once cost a season's grain now cost a lifetime of debt. The orchards that once shaded the hills were stumps. The canals silted, the barns were rotted. Some of the lostlings stayed in their parents' lofts, too poor to take their own homes. Others wandered the meadows, afraid to wed or raise children, whispering, "How can we promise a future when the land itself offers none?" Many never even courted. Who dares love when one cannot provide? And when the PlentyFolk, now old, looked for wealth that they had been promised, they found it gone. The orchards were gone. The Extractors carried it away. And worse, the medicine of the men of the valley had learned a trick of their own. With the help of the Extractors, they created a convoluted and complex system to line their own pockets. They knew the PlentyFolk, growing frail, would pay anything for another trip around the sun. And so, what remained of their stores flowed into the white tents of healing, until even then, that was depleted. And yet, even as the fields withered, the PlentyFolk still clung to the levers of power in Everstead. They filled the council halls with gray heads, men and women well past their harvest years, making laws for children in a world they no longer understood. Their leaders were older than the orchards themselves and shouting from the hilltops while the valley crumbled beneath their feet. The PlentyFolk, as a whole, were not evil. They were not cruel. They were simply blind. They believed abundance was eternal, so they handed the future to those who promised comfort without cost. Well, now Everstead stands at a crossroads. The lostlings can curse their parents, let the valley wither, and leave for other lands. Or the PlentyFolk they're still alive, can remember the lesson of the builders, that wealth is not found in promises nor towers far away, but in seeds planted and shade left for those who come after. If they chose, even now, at this late moment in their lives, the PlentyFolk could use their positions of power to force the Extractors to give back what was stolen from the whole of Everstead. They could tend the soil, they could teach, they could give back, not to the medicine men, but directly to their sons and daughters. And then Everstead might bloom again. But that requires sacrifice, a lesson the builders once knew, that many of the PlentyFolk forgot. It will not be easy. Orchards take time. Soil must be healed. But the valleys have a way of forgiving those that put their hands to the plow. And if one day the PlentyFolk remember to step aside, if the lostlings choose to plant rather than curse, the valley may see a new generation rise. They will not be builders, nor PlentyFolk, nor lostlings. They will be known as the restorers. Those who healed what was broken, who planted shade for strangers they would never meet, who learned the hardest lesson of all, that abundance is not inherited, it is tended. And in their hands, Everstead may bloom again. Well, friends, that's the story. If you're one of the PlentyFolk, still clutching the levers of power, hear me plain. You don't get to sit on that city council hall forever while the field's beneath you. Step aside, hand the tools to younger hands. Plant something that's real before it's too late. And as for the Extractors, don't think the valley hasn't seen your tricks. You strip mined the orchards, hollowed the barns, and sold promises you never meant to keep. You fattened yourself on the sweat of others and called it private equity. But your time's running out. The people remember, and no matter how tall your towers rise, they'll fall if the roots beneath them give way. I'm Grunkle Tim. History doesn't repeat itself, but often it rhymes. I just hope the PlentyFolk figure it out while they still have time. They only got a couple years left before the Extractors will get to keep all the loot. What do you think the next chapter for Everstead is? Leave me a little something in the comments. And if you found meaning in this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Grunkle Tim, signing off.